Is Elon Musk declaring war on remote work? Will the proposed U.S. Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, co-led by Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, prompt other CEOs to demand a mass return to office? Former Google and Slack executive Brian Elliott weighs in on this controversial topic. In this interview, Elliott discusses the impact DOGE policies may have on both federal and private workers. He also talks about how to effectively argue against RTO mandates. Listen to the end to learn why working from home is not just a COVID-era privilege.
Efficiency isn't really an outcome that DOGE's drive for forcing federal workers to return to the office is really going to generate. In fact, the research shows zero efficiency gains. Return to office mandates don't really result in performance improvements. There's been plenty of research that's been done around this. There's no financial impact that's been seen to date on this. There's not even a stock pop, as most people would expect. What does happen, though, is people quit. And it's not the slackers that Elon and Vivek think are going to quit when they're forced back into the office. It's actually women who are more often than not primary caregivers, and it's top performers, the people who are promoted more often, the people who are more tenured in an organization. They're the most likely to leave because they're the most marketable. So if you want to drive out your top performers, a return to office mandate is a great way to do it. The quiet part about an RTO mandate is it's a soft layoff. Look, when Amazon and Washington Post put this out there and said that we want people back in the office 5 days a week, they were asked a couple of times explicitly, is this trying to get people to quit? And the executives said, no, it's not about people quitting. But at the same time, they had other executives out there saying, but if you're not willing to come in the office 5 days a week, you should quit. Elon and Vivek basically just said the quiet part out loud. They said, our intention here is to get people to quit. We expect 25% of government workers to quit when they are forced back in the office 5 days a week. That's a soft layoff. That is trying to drive people to leave without severance as opposed to a hard layoff, which is getting people to leave and giving them a severance package. I don't think real estate is a primary driver in these conversations, but unfortunately, it is a factor quite often in these conversations because executives are looking at really nice offices in places they may have outfitted over the course of the years and thinking, God, this place is great. Why isn't it being better utilized? Number one issue in that, though, is it's sunk cost fallacy, meaning you paid for it or you signed the lease. It's just part of your life for a period of time. Instead, a better answer is to look at that and go, great, how soon can I get out of that lease? How soon can I shrink to a space that I really need? And let's not worry about the cost of something that we don't really need to operate in the future. The second big issue, though, underneath it is executives coming back into the office and not feeling the buzz that they expect to see. And that creates a bit of fear and angst. Are people really working? The better answer for that, of course, is to manage people on the basis of results, on performance, and to measure and monitor their performance, not their activity. We all know people who came into the office every day and didn't really work that hard, right? It's no proof point. The second big thing that executives have got to do, they got to get into the digital tools that their teams are using. A lot of executives are missing out on the conversation and the activity that's happening inside those digital tools, which is where it's migrated from the cubicles and the open office floor plans. That's where that noise and that activity that was happening inside the office has shifted. And if as a leader you're sitting outside of that, you really need to get into it in order to understand what's going on. It's not an effective way to cut costs in the federal workforce. The move towards teleworking and more remote work has actually driven performance improvements and a focus on performance that's been needed all along. So why would you stop now? There's also reports coming out from GAO, the Government Accountability Office, that show that this move towards more telework and more remote work has actually been beneficial to constituents. So if you look at the IRS, if you look at the Veterans Administration, the data actually shows that they're hiring people in cheaper locations that are highly performative, that have actually improved service to constituents. And it's typically that gap in labor that actually has been the problem in the first place. The second big factor underneath this is a distraction. Federal workers are 1.8% of the federal workforce or the federal budget overall. It's a fairly small number. But then you layer on top of that the following. 70% of that federal workforce is civilian, military, or security related, which they're not going to want to touch whatsoever. Of the remainder, half of those people are already in the office 5 days a week. Of the teleworkers, which is the next 40%, they're in the office 3 days a week. You're talking about a small number on a small number on a small number that they're focused on here. The only reason to do this is because you want to do damage to some of those organizations. Focus on the bigger numbers on where the spending actually is if you want to drive efficiency in the government. So leaders in other industries are going to see this in two different ways. One is this DOGE drive is part of an ongoing set of the narrative around Amazon, Washington Post, and others pushing for people to be back in the office 5 days a week. It's actually a fairly small minority of firms that are doing this. Even the recent data out of Flex Index shows there's been no real movement towards 5 days a week in the office, especially in the United States. It's literally 32% of organizations that have that as a policy, and it hasn't moved over the course of the past year. The second big issue, though, from a leadership perspective is going to be all of your employees are also constituents and members of groups that are supported by the federal government agencies that these guys are often targeting. So if you're an employer who's worried about how your own employees are being treated by some of these federal agencies, that's also going to be a concern. Because whether it's waiting on IRS hotlines or for support from the Social Security Administration or to get their VA benefits or any of a number of other issues like how do I get a passport, the more that you drive labor out of the federal government in places where it is efficient and effective, the worse that constituent service becomes. And that's got a knock-on effect to the productivity and happiness of your own employees. At the end of the day, these are services that employers rely on to the benefit of their own employees. And that's a fairly big deal that people should be concerned about. So the best way to make the case against an RTO mandate, besides trotting out some of the research that I've been sharing with you here today and some of the articles that we've written, is to focus on three key questions. Number one, in the C-suite, is the C-suite itself actually the right place to be making this decision? Most organizations past any minimum scale are distributed and they're complex. And the needs of different functional teams and different business units are going to vary a lot. Those leaders actually need to work with their teams to find out what the right solution is for them, because the needs of a sales organization and the needs of an engineering team may be vastly different. The needs of your teams in Europe and the US may be different. So figuring out the solution to all this probably doesn't belong in the CEO's hands. It belongs in the hands of the people that he hired in order to figure out the right solution for the different teams and functions that constitute an organization. The second issue is, instead of sweating attendance, why aren't we focusing on performance, something that's actually much more important to all of us? Why aren't we using this opportunity to get a lot clearer and crisper about our goals and how we're going to measure progress against them, how we're going to hold people and teams accountable to performance against those goals and raise the performance of our organization instead of worrying about whether or not people are sitting in a seat on a day in, day out basis? And the third big question to ask is, what problem are we really trying to solve? If we have a connection and collaboration problem, how are we actually approaching that? Are we talking to people and teams to find out where the issues and the problems lie? Are we leveraging our digital tools as well as in-person experiences? If we have a performance problem in a part of the organization, why aren't we focusing on the conversation on that part of the organization and trying to find a solution? What problem are we trying to solve is a great way to approach the actual underlying challenges of an organization. Calling flexibility a COVID-era privilege assumes that all the benefits go to the workers. That's actually not at all the case. There's huge business benefits to adopting flexibility in your workforce. And there's a lot of firms out there that are seeing that set of advantages and are playing with them right now to their advantage. There's 5 big factors that actually go into this. Number one, pretty clear, your ability to attract and retain talented people is higher if you give them some flexibility. Number 2, productivity is as good or better in a hybrid work setup. Every piece of research out there will say it's as good or better. In fact, some of them will show that productivity actually goes up if you give people more flexibility. Number 3, faster growth. A study out of Boston Consulting Group and the Flex Index showed that firms who took a flexible work approach actually had faster revenue growth than those that didn't. Number 4, your workforce is more resilient. If you're piling all of your workforce into 1 or 2 or 3 cities like Washington, D.C., you're subject to things like climate change that might actually cause disruptions in your workforce. 5th, and this is the biggest, higher engagement. If you give people flexibility, but you hold them accountable to results, the signal they get is that you trust them. That trust builds engagement. That engagement leads to them doing things like going the extra mile for their customers or for their constituents. That is what you really want at the end of the day.
We hope you found Brian Elliott's interview insightful and educational. Do you think Musk's RTO mandate will actually improve government efficiency? Or is this move driven by outdated thinking about work? Or something in between? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For more insights from industry leaders, please check out this playlist. Thanks for watching.